Welcome, Buff fans, to another edition of the Primetime Night Owls. I'm Brian Howell. Please be joined by Matt Smith, who looks like he's on a beach. Matt, I'm not sure you're really on a beach, are you?
I'm on a beach in my mind. It's
There
summer
you go.
in my mind. So can I just, a little fishing t-shirt, just imagine what it would be like, to have, exposable income, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
And just be able to do things like that would be nice, wouldn't it, Brian?
yeah.
You're not really a beach guy though, so you might not actually think this looks all that great.
I'm not a beach guy, but I understand a lot of people are, and so it does look great to a lot of people. And
Yeah.
and in a lot of ways, I'd be jealous if you were there because it means you're on vacation. So
Yeah.
that's
Well,
always a
I'm
good
not.
thing.
I'm not.
Yeah.
I am right here though. I am
Okay.
right here,
All
and
right.
that's what counts. How are you doing?
I'm fine. You know, full house again.
Hmm.
Daughter, I went last week and moved my daughter back from Utah State, and son moved back from Tennessee. So
Yeah.
we got a full house again. So
Oh yeah.
and a high school
Fully loaded.
graduation coming up later this month. So
Woohoo!
yeah,
You're
uh,
dadding it up.
yeah, it's been busy. So,
Yeah, I understand that.
but and it was funny. It'd been pretty quiet for the Buffs in the transfer portal, and then literally the day I leave, they get
Yeah.
a transfer edition. And I was gone 2 days, and they got five transfer editions in those 2 days. So, Buff fans are probably thinking, leave again so we can add more players. So, because they still got a lot to add. But yeah, we're going to talk about those guys because that's all been since we last did a show. So there's plenty of guys to talk about here.
Yeah, I mean, things are starting to get rolling now that spring ball's over and the portal is closed to the underclassmen, right? And
Yep.
I imagine here we're going to get some graduations coming up soon and some more grad transfers hitting the portal. And based upon how things have gone, I imagine CU is going to be looking pretty hard at those names who hop in there. But yeah, I mean, good to see that a little traction has picked up, certainly. And yeah, we're going to get into these guys who they added along the way, but just kind of the a week after really the fallout of Shedeur's historic slide. Been fascinating to watch how, just the city of Cleveland has reacted to that and how the NFL community has reacted to that. He's one of the highest selling jerseys in the league right now. I think he's number one for his draft class. So it wasn't like he wasn't going to bring the eyeballs and attention. We
Yeah.
can attest to that, certainly. And so it's fascinating to me to see kind of how the Cleveland media is going about addressing some of that. And once rookie minicamp starts, I think it's coming up this week actually for the Browns because I saw LeJohntay was in rookie minicamp for the Ravens, and so I think once he gets on the field, some of that other stuff about him just going around the city and having somebody post a couple of videos will quiet some of that crowd down, I would think, but
Yeah.
we're gonna find out.
Yeah, you would think so. I was actually on Cleveland radio today, a station that had me on before the draft, and they said, "We'll have you on if the Browns end up landing one of those two guys," and they did. So, had me on, and they were talking about Shedeur and already being out there working out, doing some things in Akron, I think it was, and some other places. And they said, "You're probably not surprised by that." I'm like, "No, I'm not. I'm telling you, once he's on an organization, all the stuff you heard about." Once he's on in an organization, he'll be all in for that team. And they asked me my prediction, Matt. Like, well, what do you think's going to happen with this quarterback competition? I told them. So I told all the Cleveland people in Cleveland my prediction. I told you last week that I think Joe Flacco's their starter, but at some point, Shedeur Sanders takes over and will be the starter for the Cleveland Browns, and I fully believe that. So we'll see how that turns out. But it doesn't surprise me at all. Shedeur's already out there putting in some work uh, in Cleveland, in the Cleveland area, and already visiting a school out there. That's not fake stuff. That's not PR stuff. I mean, that's just what Shedeur does. I mean, how many times did he
Right.
visit a school out here? He doesn't have to do that stuff. He's all in as a Brown, and that's what I expected out of him.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I think both Shadura and Shiloh really understand that Coach Prime has really taught them well is that just the smallest of interactions can be a lifetime memory. And
Yeah,
we asked Shiloh at We Ain't Hard to Find showcase at Pro Day about him going into the stands at Oklahoma State against, the Cowboys in that final home game and then after the Alamo Bowl hanging out with all the fans. He's like, "Look, I mean, those are lifelong memories for people if you look up to those players." And certainly for CU fans, we've had I'm sure a lot of CU fans have had small individual moments, be it running into them at Target or
yeah.
what have you. So, it's definitely good to see that he's starting to get acclimated. And look, he's got a long road to go here and a lot to prove. And certainly everybody's pulling for him.
Yeah, they one real quick. They also asked me who I thought Shedeur would blame the most for his slide, and I said, well, contrary to popular belief on who he is, he wouldn't blame anybody but himself.
No, I
And
don't
he
even think you talk about it.
right, like, I don't think he would, but if he had to blame somebody, I think that Shedeur would blame himself and say, you know what, I could have done better in certain areas. Um, I think
He
there's this narrative that he blames other people, blames the offensive line, things like that. But you know, if he was going to blame somebody, I think he'd point the finger at himself.
I'm on the beach right now, so I don't have to deal with those crazy takes. But yeah, look, I mean, he even brought it up in his post-draft conference call
Yeah,
where they asked him, "Look, are there some things that you would have done different?" He's like, "Well, maybe at the time I thought, X, Y, or Z was the right thing to do, and looking back, maybe I'd do something a little bit differently." But
yeah,
he also brought up, "Hey, look, whatever happened with other teams outside of the Browns is not really relevant because I'm a part of the organization now. So let's move forward and." Build a relationship here and start working in Cleveland because he's right in that regard. I mean, whatever happened in the past is the past. And look,
yeah,
no NFL organization is infallible, especially teams picking in the top 10 of the draft, especially teams this year specifically who needed a quarterback. Look, I outside of maybe Pittsburgh, who has the run of, winning seasons under Mike Tomlin, it's impressive because he's done it with some different quarterbacks, but it's kind of a hollow record because they really haven't had any playoff success
yeah,
whatsoever. So you can hang your hat on it, but at the very same time, I would say that most of the teams that needed a quarterback this year, kind of luck of the draw, kind of unlucky, somewhat dysfunctional, right? I look at the Giants, the Browns, the Jets, even if they're committed to Justin Fields, they still need another option. I think they have Tyrod Taylor as a backup, but the point is that, you didn't really have a lot of organizations with their ducks in a row. New Orleans, that type of a situation. So,
yeah,
you know, maybe it ends up working out for the best. And look, Brian, I'm a true believer in life. Everything happens for a reason, even if it's hard to figure out what those reasons are in the moment. At
yeah,
some point down the line, the universe will reveal the lesson that you were supposed to have learned, and as long as you remain open to it. So hopefully for Shedeur, he gets a good start to minicamp, and I believe he will. Like we've
yeah,
said this whole time, and I know a lot of people last week got upset with me for sharing the perspective of just it's a long road. But I will say that if he gets a fair shot, as I said last week, I have full confidence in the player. I'm just not convinced that the shot will be fair, especially in a four-man quarterback competition. So best to him. I'm wishing him all the luck in the world, and certainly we'll be pulling for him, man. I mean, there's no doubt about that. If you've been watching the show, you know how big of a supporter you and I are of him. So.
yeah. Well, and I think about something that Coach Prime said at that pro day. Once they get drafted, it's that race to the second contract, and that's really what it's all about at this point. Get that opportunity, prove yourself, and then get the big deal at some point.
I will say I did find it funny, and some fans definitely aren't on social media. I wanted to read this coming from Ben Ramley, who's an antitrust journalist. Looks like he works for the Global Competition Review. There was a fan who filed an antitrust lawsuit accusing the NFL and its teams of conspiring not to draft Shedeur Sanders until the fifth round. The fan is asking for $100 million dollars and an apology for emotional distress. Which one of you was it? Okay, which one of you had the idea? Put yourself in the
Yeah,
comments, and we can all do a class action and see if we can take the NFL for everything it's worth.
yeah,
I thought that was funny though.
and good luck with that lawsuit. All right,
Yeah, I would like. You know what? Can we get a live stream of that trial? Like, I,
right.
I really want to hear the opening arguments from the prosecution.
That's the only thing I want to hear, and then I'll tune out. Let's move on to the transfer additions
Oh,
and the
hold on.
20.
Oh my God, they're so good. I haven't really, to be honest with you, I haven't really read the lawsuit yet, and I just had it pulled up. But one of the factual background, just I got to read you just one little line here. B. Plaintiff attended the Colorado Buffaloes' first game against the TCU Horned Frogs in September 2023, witnessing firsthand Sanders' exceptional talent and potential in Coach Deion Sanders with the program. I think that's amazing. Just shout out to that person for having the balls to do that. I think that's really
Hey,
funny.
for me, having been at all those games and suffering through the games before Coach Prime got here, I've got to get a piece of that
That's what I'm
that
saying. A
suit, right?
little piece of the pie.
So
Reports and leaked statements suggested that Sanders, quote, tanked interviews and, quote, wasn't prepared and was, quote, too cocky, which contributed to a narrative that has unjustly harmed his reputation and potential as a player. I've never seen anyone sue someone else for defamation of somebody else. Have
yeah,
you?
no,
That's funny.
wow. All
Anyway.
right, well,
Sorry. Had to bring
all
that up because I
all the
know some fans won't see that. So I thought
yeah,
that was a good chuckle. Everybody could get out there together.
yeah, the Shedeur stuff has been
It's wild, man.
fascinating. All right,
Yeah.
let's move on to some transfers. And the first one on board last week, Hykeem Williams, receiver from Florida State, who in 2 years at FSU, 21 catches for 267 yards, 2 touchdowns. He is a former five-star, Matt. And I was telling you last week I did a story on who kind of looking ahead to the 26th draft and who might be the top prospects for the Buffs. And there's a site out there, I can't remember the name of it right now. NFL Draft Buzz, I think,
Okay.
was the name of it, who actually listed Hykeem Williams as the highest rated Buffs prospect for the 2026 draft. He'd obviously have to declare early, but I assume a lot of that is because he was a five-star coming out of high school just 2 years ago.
Yeah, when you watch the limited amount of tape, on him, look, he's a giant and he runs like the wind. So you're talking about unbridled athleticism in Hykeem Williams and a skill set,
Yeah.
quite frankly, that Colorado really doesn't have. I think a lot of people are very confident in the receiving core, as are you and I. We like some
Yeah.
of the pieces. They're just not as well structured, or at least hadn't been up until landing Sincere Brown and bringing in Hykeem Williams. One thing that I thought they learned a lot from 2023 was they didn't have all the exact roles that they wanted in place in that receiving core. And certainly with Travis in and out of the lineup that year, it threw things off. But especially with Will and LeJontay and Jimmy and Travis last year, bringing Omarion and bringing Treylon, they had a little bit of everything. They had size,
Yeah.
they had speed, they had agility, they had, versatility. And I think with a guy like Hykeem Williams, this is a guy who's largely unproven. He really didn't see the field much at FSU, and when he did, it was late in pretty meaningless games from what I saw. I mean, you tell me if you saw anything much different, but he's a younger player, right? Who
Yeah.
was behind some talented individuals. And so sometimes when you go to bigger schools like that, you've got to wait your turn, and that's typically how college football has gone. However, clearly not a great fit. This was also the kid who was talking smack about Travis Hunter a couple of years ago, if you'll remember that, talking about how I can't remember exactly what he said, but I thought it was pretty funny, just the circle of life, him ending up back at CU. But look, this is a skill set that outside of Sincere Brown, they don't have. I don't know if he's going to be a major contributor right away, but I'll say this. I don't think anybody currently occupies that role that he would play. I saw some folks,
Yeah.
FSU fans, and take this with a grain of salt, who were saying, look, I mean, this is a guy you could put some weight on and move to tight end. I don't think that's what CU would do with him, but this is somebody who, look, just find a way to get the ball in his hands in space and let that athleticism take over. And one thing that Colorado did really well last year was find a way to get the ball out quickly to playmakers in space. So hopefully he can find a way to factor into the rotation right away because, like I said, they could use that athleticism and size on the outside.
Yeah, 6'2", 215 pounds. That's what he's listed at by FSU, and big guy. So yeah, I guess in theory you could put 20, 30 pounds on him and make him a tight end, but um,
These are,
he's
like I said, you take it with a grain of salt. That's
yeah,
from fans.
he
Okay.
he
So,
just he just strikes me as a guy that is super talented and
yeah.
is ready to have his breakout year. And so I think that the Buffs are hoping that's the case. And Coach Prime mentioned that he wanted a receiver that was a man and a dog. So this might be the guy. Sincere Brown, 6'5", 190. He committed. I guess a week or so earlier than that, so he's been on board for a couple of weeks, but had the one big year at Campbell last year. Huge receiver. There haven't been a lot of 6'5" receivers at Colorado in a long time, so yeah, you got some big guys now. It'll be interesting to see how that receiver room shapes up, Matt, was because you and I think we both believe in Omarion Miller's potential, Treylon Miller's potential, Isaiah Hards they love, obviously, and then they got a lot of other pieces. I mean, Terrell Timmons is sort
Joseph
of that bigger
Williams.
receiver. What's that?
Joseph
Yeah,
Williams.
Joseph Williams, of course, coming in from Tulsa. Looking at the list here, I mean, they love Cam McKell, Quentin Gibson, Quinnell Farrakhan. So there's a ton of talent. I'm just curious where he fits in, and but he does strike me as that guy that maybe can come in and have that breakout year.
Yeah, and I think compared to maybe the last 2 years with Shedeur, who was just deadly accurate, Salter and Lewis aren't going to be as accurate as Shedeur, at least not at the outset. And look, Shedeur is the FBS record holder for, completion percentage. So
Yeah,
if they're in that neighborhood, I think that would be a great thing. The point is that having athletes like that who can win a jump ball, I think is important when you're dealing with a quarterback who's maybe not as accurate either. And so that helps assuredly. And look, I think what you have is the battleground for some really good competition in that
yeah,
wide receiver room because Draylon's got a spot locked down. We'll see what Omarion looks like when he's back healthy. Remember now, that's a significant injury that he suffered last year. And while I
yeah,
do believe that he will return to form because, humans just in general know way more about these injuries and recovery processes and how to take care of it now. And he's young,
yeah.
to be young again and to have your
Hmm.
body bounce back. But at the same time, we just need to see him prove that he is back up to form. But outside of that, you have some other options. And if you have injuries, you have a little bit more depth there. I certainly like the shape of that room more now, even if I would say there's a lot of unprovens in there, right? Like I think there's
Yeah,
talent. There's undoubtedly talent, but as far as proven production goes, Draylon at the end of last year, and I think you and I are both expecting a really big, couple of seasons here from Draylon.
yeah,
But I had some fans, reach out and say, well, maybe they'd use those guys in the backfield, Draylon a little bit, and Isaiah some of that versatility. And look, I hope they do. They're going to have to get really creative this year. I don't think it's going to be consistent. And even Cam Michael, excuse me, that one always trips me up. Cam Michael, Pat Shermer brought up that they see him as a receiver. So he
yeah.
may have been getting some reps in camp at running back because of numbers. They were short, especially after losing Augustive, but he will definitely be a receiver for this football team.
Yeah, let's move on. A couple of guys from Tennessee. The first one, actually, you know what? Let's stay on offense real quick and let's go
Okay.
to running back. Dekalon Taylor from Incarnate Word. Uh, Interesting player here. 5'9", 166. So he's a little guy, but
Mm-hmm.
highly productive at Incarnate Word last year. Rushed for 909 yards, 9 touchdowns in 11 games. Six yards a carry, which is pretty good. Also had 22 catches, and was a really good. He's a really good kick and punt returner. So he's an intriguing guy, and one that I think could be an explosive player at times, but that's the first running back edition. We expect two or three. That's the first one.
Yeah, that's the first one. I see him as a gadget guy. You got to comp him to
Mhm.
Dylan Edwards because that's just what we saw in the system. Now, I don't think
Yeah.
he is Dylan Edwards, but we can comp him in the system. He might be a better runner than Dylan is, though. Dylan's really kind of taken off as a receiver more, and I think Dekalon possesses a little bit more potential than Dylan did, just lined up in the backfield. We'll
Yeah.
see. We'll see. It's at the FCS level. I definitely got some people all hot and bothered yesterday because, quite frankly, I'm a little bit concerned about what their plan is at running back right now. They lost Isaiah Gustive, they lost Brandon Hood, or at least moved on from those guys, and quite frankly, all they've added is a 5'9", 166-pound FCS back. Now there's plenty of time left, but adding Marshall Falk, at least in my opinion, I thought would have pretty instant results just because of who he is, and I think it kind of goes into more of what we've been talking about, how if there's been a real injection of NIL resources into this program, we just have yet to see much evidence of it pan out in recruiting, at least in the spring portal. And we
Right.
recognize that all these things are new. Maybe that, inflection that we've been hearing about is more of a process that will take a couple of years to generate, raise, and distribute. So maybe there's some, issues they're having there with their current liquidity, or at least what they feel comfortable in doling out. I don't know. But it's definitely raising my eyebrow that they haven't been able to find, a number one back. That's very confusing to me. I don't really get
Yeah.
it, and I fail to see the plan here. Like Dekalon Taylor, I expect to be a guy who gets what, like 6, 7 touches a game, maybe if he earns that,
From the
and
backfield, I mean.
Maybe. Yeah,
Yeah,
maybe. I'm not sure. We'll see how he does in camp. He's very slight. He's
yeah,
going to have to prove that he can do that at this level, which I think he can. That's a guy that you can also spread out wide a little bit and use in the
mhm,
return game. So I think they need some of those guys as well. Somebody who's proven that they can do it at least, right? They brought in LeJohntay, who was all conference at a lower level as a returner, as was Dekalon, if my memory serves. So I am underwhelmed by what they've done there. It doesn't mean that they can't fix it. It's just a concern of mine because, as we've talked about very extensively on this podcast, they were the worst rushing team in the country the last 2 years, and that there just not been significant strides I've seen to go and
yeah,
correct that. So I
yeah.
think they will have a better offensive line. I do. I don't know how much, but I do believe it will be better. So that should help right there. I think the fact that they have a quarterback that's going to be willing to pull the ball and run with it in Caden Salter, and a guy who's, I would say, probably the best aspect of his game from what I've seen so far is what he can do with his legs personally, which
Mhm.
obviously we haven't had much of an example of because all we saw was a spring game where quarterbacks weren't live. So not a great representation of it, but the quarterback alone should help open up the running game a little bit, but you got to have guys that can go. And
Right.
you look at Micah and Dallin, and yeah, I believe they could have better seasons, but these are two guys that missed time last year, and running back is almost 100% injury. You won't make it through the year without having some guy dinged up or nicked up, and one
Right.
or two injuries, and you're in a really, really bad spot right now in that room. And even still, I don't think you're in a great spot to start with. I mean,
Yeah.
Micah was getting like 5, 6 carries a game and couldn't make it through the season with the hamstring. And
Right.
Dallin was banged up too. So I don't think it's a good plan right now. I'm open to that changing, and I'm open to them maybe pulling a grad transfer. I could see them maybe trying to put their eggs in that basket once graduations end. But as it stands right now, I think it's a failure at that position. And that's nothing against Taylor. I think he's a good little weapon to add, but do I think he's going to have a significant impact on this team? I don't
Right.
know. I mean, that's hard for me to project right now.
Yeah, I'm with you because look, in the first transfer portal period, that was one of the I think it was one of only two spots that they didn't address at all. They didn't bring in anybody. And what you've done is lose Isaiah Gussif, who was your top rusher last year, and Brandon Hood, who I was high on, but apparently they were not. From what it appears, they asked Brandon Hood to move on, and that was that cost them Colton Hood as well. So, um, yeah, I'm a little concerned with it. I believe in Marshall Falk, but you got to have players, and I know there'll be fans that say the reason why they struggle with the run game was the offensive line. Yes and no. Um, a big part of it's the offensive line, but I don't think they had great backs either. And so, Charlie offered all is the other um, scholarship back there. But look, if they believed in Charlie, they would have given him the ball last year, and they didn't. And um, love Charlie, and he's a great story,
Great kid.
and awesome person, and all
Yeah.
that. He was the starter, I think, coming out of. I think he was a starter in week one,
Technically
wasn't he?
last yeah, he was a couple
Yeah.
weeks. I mean, it was a
Actually, I think
couple weeks and it didn't. He
wasn't
started at
this.
Nebraska too.
Yeah, wasn't the actual official starter Draylon
Yes, technically. Yeah.
against North Dakota
Yeah.
State? But Charlie got that first crack last year, and he didn't have that many opportunities last year. I'm trying to find
He
how
got
many.
he finally broke out a big run against Arizona, and then they got him a touchdown against Oklahoma State. But he's not their
Yeah,
plan. And if he is their plan, it's a terrible plan. And it's no offense to
yeah,
Charlie. We're talking about competing for national championships and Big 12 titles. You got to have some dogs in the backfield. Where are the Devin Neals? Where are the DJ Giddens? Where are the RJ Harveys? Those
yeah,
guys who you can rely on for 1,000-yard season. And I think it's very short-sighted to have told Brandon Hood to go with the scholarship numbers that they have, unless there
yeah.
was friction in there and those two didn't get along or something happened. But
Right.
I fail to see how that was a good decision because you lost Colton Hood and you've got what, like 70 scholarship players you couldn't have kept anyway.
Yeah,
Regardless, I don't know what their plan is right now. All I know is that we don't know what it is because it's not
yeah,
done yet. I refuse to believe that they're going to go into the season with the running back room just as is. I
yeah,
mean, if they don't find at least one more, they got to find two more. Like I
yeah,
still think they need two. So we'll see.
yeah. And looking at Charlie, by the way, 26 carries on the season,
Yeah.
and seven of them came against Arizona, seven for 53, 39 on that one run, and that was all after you're up by 4 touchdowns late in the game. So, um, and then after that, that was mid-October. He had 5 carries the rest of the season.
The one thing I
So,
will say about Dekalon is that having a guy who can catch the ball out of the backfield in that RPO system, that'll probably be a little bit more effective than what we saw with Dylan Edwards because everybody knew that when he was in the backfield, if he wasn't going to carry it, then Shedeur was going to throw it, right? Whereas
yeah,
you can do a little bit more sleight of hand with a guy like that. You can fake him, you can give him the fake and then throw it to him in the flat, stuff like that. And
yeah,
Salter is certainly a little bit more comfortable with doing that than Shedeur probably was. So there are some options, and I think he could play a role on this team, but they have not solved what I believe to be their number one priority for 2 years in a row.
yeah,
Like for two
yeah,
years in a row, we've been
yeah,
talking about running the football, and Isaiah Augustive was a bit of a developmental piece that they brought in last year that finally started to catch some traction. And whether he got impermissibly contacted by Virginia or not, and got offered a big, reportedly. By the way, that hasn't come from any official source. There was a number where I think it was $500,000.
right,
Some fan put on social media. That's
yeah,
not per any official source, so nobody knows
right,
what's true about that or what's not. I assume he did get some money, but the
yeah,
point remains that by the end of the year, there wasn't anyone they could rely on in the backfield other than Augustive. Welch had a few moments, but he wasn't great either. So I disagree heavily with fans there that they're set at the running back position. And if that's the opinion of the program as well, I'd probably disagree with them.
well, and I think Dekalon Taylor's an upgrade, but I also think that if you think you're set with 4 guys, you're fooling
Those
yourself.
four. Yeah.
Um,
I think
any
you could have
four,
four. I mean,
honestly,
I
I
mean, I
think I
just
think I think 4 is really light for college football. Um, I mean, we saw them go through a lot of guys last year, and yeah, maybe you have that workhorse back that you know they can stay healthy all year, and but they don't have that among
no.
this 4, and so I do think they need probably 2 more. I would expect to see at least 2 more, at least one, and I would hope to see 2 more this offseason. And who knows where they are? I mean, I don't know what's left out there, Matt. I mean, I agree with you that the signs we're seeing, they don't have a ton of NIL money. I mean, they went after the kid from Cal. Um, I'm blanking on his name right
Javian
now.
Thomas.
Yeah, yeah. So went after him. I would have loved him, but they couldn't land him. So, um, when we're seeing some other lower level backs go elsewhere, I don't know if they've been in on them or not, but yeah, I think he's a nice player. He upgrades the roster a little bit, but you got to get better,
Yeah,
even than what they're at.
and I had some people sending me messages that they had a 2026 kid in who's highly rated in that class. Here's the story. I do believe they're upping their freshman recruiting. I was talking to some people that also think that they're putting a little bit more emphasis on the freshman class for 2026, which kind of tells me that they don't think they're going to be able to really compete like they were in the portal only because they don't have the resources at least before it gets all regulated. And who knows what happens with the house settlement. That is now, we don't have to get into that right now, but that is a bit
Yeah,
of a mess at the moment. So the point is that we'll see what happens. The fact is, though, they're also bringing in the number one linebacker in 2026, and that kid is committed to 5 different schools already. Coach
yeah,
Prime has been, very vocal about how kids shouldn't be allowed to date programs. You got to commit, right? And if you commit, you're in, right? We've heard that from the man himself. So fans who get upset about, hey, look what they're doing in 2026, how does that help them in 2025?
yeah,
And if you don't have a great season in 2025, what are you going to sell to recruits in 2026? Like
yeah,
you can't just fall off and think that you're going to be able to keep a bunch of kids because, you've got Hall of Fame coaches. I think what we're learning, Brian, is that if the money is going to be this substantial, if we're talking about like $500,000 to $750,000 for
yeah,
some of these players, as opposed to I don't know what they have, I'm throwing out a ballpark figure, 100 grand and getting coached by Coach Prime, unless you are a dog and one of the best at your position in the country, I don't know why you would pass up $600,000 right now. So I think that's we can talk about NFL over NIL, but if you don't have much NIL, I don't think you're going to get many kids who are looking for NFL right now because of the way that things have changed just this year. It's different than
Right.
it was even last year or the year before. So we'll see how it looks moving forward. But yeah, to everybody who keeps telling me, look at who they're bringing in for 2026, that means very little to me. I mean, these
Right.
kids flip so much and so
Right.
often these days. They wait to see the wind change and then they're at a different program. So I,
And the
I'm
thing
not
is,
really gonna plant my flag and oh
right.
look who they have for 26 yet.
You've also got an entire 25 season to play before that signing day. And if that 25 season isn't very good, I don't care who you're in on right now. Those players are going to say, no.
No.
I mean, this is 25 is your first chance to prove that we can still win without Travis and Shedeur.
That's
If
exactly
they're
right.
3-9 or 4-8, a lot of people are gonna be like,
Mm.
they're just Colorado, you know. It.
Yep.
I mean, there's some famous guys there, and there's some Hall of Famers, but they're just Colorado. So this year, I mean, the focus has got to be the 26 recruiting. I get it. I understand when people get excited about it, but I'm with you that like that doesn't get me going right now. It's what are you bringing in for this year? And there's some spots here, running back being one of them that you're concerned about. So,
Yeah.
um,
We can move
let,
on. I just felt like it
yeah,
was important to explain because I know a lot of fans got upset. And, the other thing that I want to make sure fans realize it's not Brian nor my responsibility to root for what's going on here. What we're
right.
doing is presenting analysis and facts. And if you can point out a factual inaccuracy in anything that I posted, please feel free and put it right here. But
Yeah,
there wasn't one. So I would just say we're both cognizant that there's plenty of time left to go, but I think it's definitely worth pointing out that right now, I don't know, to me it's a concern.
yeah, yeah. I look at that running back room, and we've seen three of those guys on the field as buffs, and and the other one that's just coming in is a small guy coming from the FCS, and doesn't mean that
Who
he can't be good. Doesn't mean Dallin can't be better. Doesn't mean that Micah,
can't
with a
stay
year
healthy, be
with a year
better.
under his belt, I am a believer in the cliche. You make your biggest jump freshman year to sophomore year. So Micah's in that boat. So I believe that they could be better with that group, but I
Yeah.
also don't like going in with just four, and I'd rather see a big guy, a a bigger back, but also
Someone
somebody that's
capable of
that's
handling
proven
it. Yeah.
proven themselves. So let's move on to offensive line, where they added one of two Tennessee guys, Larry Johnson the third, listed by Tennessee at 6'7", 348 pounds. Matt, he was a top JUCO prospect when he signed, ahead of the 23 season with Tennessee. But played in only 8 games in 2 years along the offensive line. He played 133 snaps last season. So basically a Tennessee backup lineman.
Yeah.
It was huge.
Yeah. He's huge. And that's the one common denominator I would say on their, in their offensive line recruiting. They went for much bigger guys this year.
Yeah.
I think maybe
Mhm.
outside of that center that they had gotten from was it South Carolina or something like that that flipped
Louisiana
to
Tech.
yeah,
Oh, no, no.
Louisiana. No. The Connor something or anyway, regardless, they're
Yeah.
going for bigger offensive linemen.
Hmm.
And offensive line coach Gunnar White told us as much how he would rather recruit a bigger guy because he believes it's easier to go from tackle to guard versus from guard to tackle, which was a direct reflection of some of the things we saw them try and do last year, specifically kind of starting the year with Tyler Brown as a tackle and realizing, hey, look, I mean, that's not his natural position, number one, and there's
Yeah.
obvious limitations behind it. So I think what you're seeing are guys with a lot of size, but you know, at least in this case, this is a depth piece. I don't anticipate this young man to be a starter. Maybe it ends up being that way, but they definitely need more depth. So, especially at offensive line, how many offensive linemen played consistently last year? Like eight, nine, eight.
There's a lot. Yeah. 8 or 9.
So you need a good handful of those guys because one thing we know that about that position is it won't always go to plan.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes it does, but it doesn't always. And
Right.
yeah. And look, they got four guys coming back who were,
When was the last time you saw a CU offensive line plan go accordingly?
well, it's been a few years for sure.
Yeah, that's all I was saying. It's just been a little while.
There were some years though that you had,
Oh yeah,
the five guys, that was your five for 12 games. And, but it hasn't been that way in a while.
yeah,
I mean, there's four guys back this year that were multi-game starters last year. And, it's interesting. Jordan Seaton, obviously, Tyler Brown, Kareem Harden, and Philip Houston. So you have four guys back, and then there's also a handful of transfer additions. So um, I do wonder where all these guys are going to fit in. I agree with you. I think Larry Johnson's probably a depth piece and someone that could compete, but I don't think that they've added a starter there. What would you say is the starting offensive line right now? Left tackle, we got Jordan.
Seaton,
Left guard.
Xavier Hill.
Okay. I agree with you. Center, Zarian McGill.
By necessity only, right? Because Coach Prime told us after the spring game they were looking for two more centers, unless those are depth pieces, which I guess that's a potential, I guess that's a possibility. But I would say as of right now, it would be McGill, but I don't know if that's
Yeah.
going to be the case at the beginning of the year. It
Yeah.
feels like maybe those are positions to me they might look in the grad transfer, era section for.
Yeah. And McGill's got plenty of experience, but never at the FBS level.
Right.
Well, never at the Power Five level. He does have it
Yeah.
at the FBS level. Right guard, Zy Chrysler,
Yes.
and right tackle.
Mana Taimane at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Or,
think he did. I think he did well. I don't think Philip Houston gets that job back. Quite frankly, he
okay.
was he was
Mhm.
not great at a lot last year. I went back and I watched some of those games here lately, and I mean, he was a stopgap for them, and certainly I thought did a good job. But to think that they wouldn't be looking for an upgrade there, I think would be a little silly. So coming
Yeah.
back off that massive knee injury, he may be ready, but I don't know if he'll be up to speed. And Mana Taimani's I think he's a bigger guy anyway.
Yeah.
I
He
think
is.
he might be a little better suited for that. So we'll see.
He's
But
a much bigger guy. I mean, if you, if you look at the roster, Monotomane 6'4", 345. Philip Houston, I can't believe he's this light, 6'5", 250. So there's a 95-pound difference on how they're listed.
it kind of feels like that when you talk to Houston, though. Like when we talk to him, he's not a big dude. Like
Yeah.
you know, he's not winning any awards stepping off the bus. That's
Right.
kind of what I'm putting out there. So
Yeah.
I don't think he's going to be their plan, but maybe at the end of the year he figures in, or halfway through the season. I don't think he'll be ready to go like the first 4 weeks. He may be ready to go, but I don't think he'll be ready to play.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong, but we'll see. We'll
So
see.
real,
Still a work in progress.
yeah. So real quick, that group, if that's the starting five, is that a better starting five than they had last year? I'd say yes.
I think so. I mean, I want to say yes. I
Yeah.
want to say yes. How much better? I don't know. We're gonna find out. That offensive line, buddy, it's so hard to
Yeah.
project because I don't even know if
I
that's gonna
agree.
be the group.
What I
You
love
know?
about this group, though, is again, there's that freshman to sophomore jump, right? I think Jordan Seaton, you're going to see a much better version of Jordan Seaton than even last year. I mean, Xavier Hill was an all conference player at Memphis,
Yeah.
and Zy Chrysler. I know PFF had him rated fairly low on Illinois' offensive line, but he was, all. He was honorable mention all Big 12, I think, two or three times. So this is a guy with a ton of experience in the Big 10 under his belt. And so I think it's a better group. I don't think it's a world beater offensive line, but I think it's a better, deeper group. I think this is actually one of the areas that you look at on this team and say, yes, they addressed it and they upgraded.
This is the best they've done at any of the position rooms on the team this year. I think
Yeah,
offensive line, they've made the biggest jump, hopefully, at least on paper. Again, this is a projection, and we don't know what it looks like till they get on the field and in training camp, and it's important because they're going to really need them. They're going to
yeah,
really need them. And if it is
yeah.
better, even more reason to go find a dog who you can hand the ball off to in the backfield.
Yeah. I'll say this too. If that group is much better, it makes everything else on that
Of
offense look a
course.
lot better. And that offense will be better than what we
Yep.
might think. So I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to seeing it. Let's switch over to the last two guys, a couple of defensive backs. Let's start with John Slaughter, who's also from Tennessee. I think he's going to play safety for the Buffs. 23 games in 2 seasons at Tennessee, but was not part of the regular rotation. He had 5 tackles and 54 defensive snaps last year. So basically a special teams guy. Um, yeah, but adding some depth at safety and maybe competing. I can't see him being a starter. I looked at, probably Carter Stoutmeyer and Tawfiq Byers as those two starters, but I think he added in a nice, um, depth piece here.
Yeah, and they already added Terrence Love from Auburn, right?
Yep.
So with him and Love, I think you have a little bit of depth, and hopefully one of those two guys can maybe be a Savion Riley type, who, if you needed to in a pinch, you could rely on. Sounds like Slaughter even lost the position that he had last year, according to some of those Vols fans I was reading. So look, I mean, that's a different beast down there in the SEC. So
Yeah.
doesn't mean that he can't hack it at this level. And though that's these are the types of things that we looked at in the first year, like a Demoy Kennedy coming from Alabama, a guy that we had hopes for, but just never panned out. So I would probably put Slaughter in that category as like, hey, maybe some potential here, probably some
Yeah.
limitations, but hopefully a good depth piece. And not to mention, without Colton Hood, you're starting to get a little bit thinner at corner if you have any injuries. Like if Hodge or McKinney were to get hurt, and you even brought up how RJ Johnson was intending to transfer but didn't get his name in the portal in time last week, that, it's just the secondary is not as strong as it looked at the start of spring ball. Let me just put
Yeah.
it that way.
Well, and also Ben Fennis at the safety as well had a good spring and um, former walk on. But look, I think that you can't discount him the way they were talking about him. And so, but I still expect Carter and Tawfiq Byer to be those starters. So it's the depth that I worry about more so at safety. And let's go to corner. You mentioned it, but the other guy that they added is a corner, Noah King, who comes from K State, but really he's a true freshman. He was a four-star recruit in this class and enrolled at K State in January. And after one semester, decided to jump in the portal and is now with the Buffs. 6'2", 200 pound corner. So yeah, add some depth there at corner and a four-star kid.
Yeah, these ones are really tough to explain because this is brand new in college football where you can go to school for a semester and then transfer. My eyebrow raises there as to why you committed to a program and then that quickly realized it wasn't a fit. It doesn't mean that
Yeah,
that's a negative reflection on the kid at all, but you definitely have to be a little bit I look at it with a side eye only because, you know, what are they so buried at Kansas State that you'd never see the field as a freshman, or you didn't like your coaches, or some of that is confusing. I don't anticipate this is a person that will play at all this season. And when you're talking about that, you don't know what it means if they'll be on the in the program, you know, past this year. So
yeah,
a depth piece, we'll see. Again, another one of those young men who, if they have injuries at the cornerback position, maybe is called into emergency duty. I don't know. But he has no, he's a true freshman. So we'll
yeah.
see.
Yeah, we'll see. And at that corner spot, I mean, Preston should be healthy. He'll be at that nickel spot, I would assume. DJ McKinney and probably RJ Johnson, who had a really good spring, being at that starting corner. And then, I mean, Noah King is the second transfer edition of this spring. Tion Parks coming over from Illinois State, who we've talked about before. And then obviously Makari Vickers from Oklahoma came in January, but had the heart surgery, and hopefully he'll be ready to go. But yeah, and Ivan Yates is a guy that came here last year from Furman, I believe, and didn't play
I
a
don't remember that
ton.
one.
He didn't play a ton last year, but um, yeah, I mean, I look at that secondary, and it's certainly not what it was last year. I like some starting pieces there, but the depth is where I kind of I worry a little bit about that secondary.
Now without Colton Hood, yeah,
Hmm.
definitely. I mean that's a huge loss, and another one of those reasons why I just go like Brendan Hood. You couldn't have made it work with him for a
Yeah,
year, for two. I struggle to understand that one. Maybe there's an explanation, maybe there's not. But the fact is, Colorado got worse with the Hood brothers leaving campus. I don't think anybody would argue, with that. Colton was set for a really big breakout year. Everybody talked about how he's becoming more of a leader, and
yeah,
seems like a massive, massive loss. And something had to be so egregious to the point where you were willing to be okay with that, unless they truly believe in Tion Parks being that guy who can step up outside opposite DJ, which I guess is a
right,
possibility. He had 11 pass breakups. He's a bigger corner if memory serves too. So, I'm not even though he's coming from the FCS, that's one of those FCS level players that I actually have some expectation for this year based upon the numbers that he put up last year at that level. Doesn't mean that's the case, but we'll find out. But yeah, Brian, I mean, anytime you lose a guy that you expect to have a major impact, it's going to hurt your team.
Yeah, for sure. And going back to RJ Johnson, I will say I don't know for a fact that he was going to enter the portal, but look,
Whatever. It's
RJ Johnson
irrelevant
was,
now.
but RJ Johnson was one of four guys that grew up together, went to the same high school, Eagles Landing Christian Academy in Georgia, and those four guys were the Hood brothers and Zach Owens. The other three all go in the portal in the same week, and so I asked somebody like, "Is RJ leaving?" And my response was, "Missed the deadline." And so and I asked RJ a question. We talked to him the last week of spring ball about having those guys there, and he just lit up and was so excited about, yeah, it's awesome having those guys there, and so I hope he's okay, mentally and ready to go and ready to kind of make his own mark. I mean, he did. They all went separate places last year.
Yeah.
A year ago, they were or that first year. Yeah, Auburn, Arkansas, they were at different places. So hopefully he can find some footing here because he's got a real opportunity. I wrote about him today, Matt, but
Oh, did you?
he's got a real opportunity today or this year to
Yeah.
be that starting corner for the Buffs and prove that he can carry over what he did in the spring. So I like him. I hope he's fully on board.
On RJ, that's one of the players that you walked out onto the field for warmups last year and you saw number 5 and you're like, "Oh, he must be somebody." Just
Yeah,
like body wise, we talked about winning an award, getting off the bus. For a corner getting off the bus, he looks good. Big size,
yeah,
great runner, good athlete. So a really interesting developmental prospect. And I say again, if you are a corner, why wouldn't you want to come here? That is, I guess, a little bit confusing to me. I think they were good before. They thought they had Colton on board. I Man, I just still struggle to think that that decision was self-inflicted.
yeah,
That is where I would say it would be short-sighted. But yeah, I mean, RJ, I mean, without Colton in the fold, if he's here now, hey man, if you want to be the man, here's an opportunity for you. You should be the starting corner opposite DJ when camp starts in the fall, as things
yeah,
stand, unless I have the wrong read, which I don't believe I do.
yeah. And could you imagine if RJ did make it into the portal and the decision to not go with Brandon Hood cost you both
And Zach Owens,
and Zach
yeah,
Owens? So
yeah, lose that
Owens went
depth
in
piece.
before, but I don't
No, I
know.
know.
Owens looks like I think Owens landed at Mississippi State where Phil Loadholt is, and so
Yeah.
maybe that was a money thing for him. But yeah, I'm curious too because Colton is already committed to Tennessee and Brandon has not committed anywhere as far as I know. So it's interesting that they want to play together. Are they going to have that chance? So we'll see. But anything else, Matt, before we get out of here?
Yeah, you brought up secondary. I wanted to say one thing, and this is just I don't know, my opinion. I think this entire staff has done right by every young man that has come into this program except for one, and that's Trevor Woods. And Trevor committed to Jacksonville State this week. They switched his position to linebacker, which that was never going to work out for Trevor. I mean, anybody could have told you that. And he was actually a prospect as a safety. He was making plays, and I think it really hurt him that they changed his position and he didn't see the field last year, unfortunately, which is fine.
Yeah,
Now it's Trevor's decision to have stayed here at the beginning of last year. Trevor probably should have seen the writing on the wall early that they didn't have any plans for him, but he was a Buff. He was, an OB and
yeah,
loved Colorado and is a great young man. And, you know, he's back with Charles Kelly at Jacksonville State, but hey, man, you can't tell me that that kid isn't a power four safety. And I felt bad for him seeing that he's going to Jacksonville State. I did because he deserves an opportunity, and he unfortunately didn't get it at the Power Four level. And I think it's a direct result of them changing his position. So,
yeah,
again, that's just a more personal one for me to bring up. I also struggle to see how Ben Finiseth is your plan, but Trevor Woods wasn't at safety. I don't know, man. There's a couple things that don't make sense to me in that regard, and these are just tiny little things. They're really irrelevant now, but you know, I know a lot of people didn't have a very high opinion of Trevor anyway, which I think is a little ridiculous
yeah.
considering how many plays he actually made. But
Right.
that's just me.
And the ironic thing is that inside linebacker is still one of those spots that you and I look at and say, that's a red flag spot right now. And then depth at safety. So
Yeah.
Trevor Woods is a guy that I think makes this team better if he was on this team. And so, yeah, he's absolutely a power four safety. And but I'm glad he's going to a spot where Charles Kelly's the head coach, and Charles Kelly worked with him for a year, so there's clearly some respect there. Kelly was not only their DC, but he was Trevor's position coach, before the switch to linebacker. So Charles believes in him, and so I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of opportunity Trevor has down there and makes the most of it. And look, if he plays like we think he will,
Yep.
it'll be interesting to see if he's a guy in that NFL draft conversation next year. Coming out of Jacksonville State. I don't know about that, but I think I expect him to have a big year at Jacksonville State because I think they got themselves a Power Four safety, and I can't
Yeah.
believe he was still on the board. I mean, because he went in the portal in January, right? And so I can't believe he was still sitting there until last week or whenever it was that he went to Jacksonville State.
Yeah, that whole situation doesn't make sense to me. And look, I'm not I maybe I came out too strong, but I really don't think they did the right thing for the player when the player was demonstrating how committed he was to the team. And
Yeah,
that to me sucks. So, they haven't done that with anybody else though. I'll just put that out there that I'm aware of. And I think that you and I both know Trevor well, so we know how good of a young man he is, and I just didn't think
yeah.
he got the most fair shake in the world.
And it was a tough spot for him too because he played a spot where Cam, Silman, Craig, and Shiloh were. So it was going to be a tough spot for him to be a starter anyway with both those guys healthy. And so
But
they,
again, that's why I asked him, at the
yeah,
beginning
I
of
know,
last spring, have you even thought about transferring? Because I mean, it was my way of kind of being like, hey, you realize they don't have plans for you here,
yeah,
and linebacker's not your spot. I'm surprised that he
yeah.
even stayed on the team last year. So certainly he has, some decision, some responsibility to play in that. But I also don't know how honest they were with him about what his role was necessarily going to be
I'll
moving
say this:
forward.
I mostly agree with you that they probably didn't do him right, but I also think they tried to do him right with the move to by saying, "Well, you're not one of our safeties, but we want you on the field, and we're kind of weak at linebacker, so here you go." It just so happened that
That
Nakai
was necessity more than
it
anything. Yeah.
was, but they tried to make it work with them, I think, and it's just Nakai. I
Sure.
mean, Trevor was a starter week one last year. Then all of a sudden, Nakai, they were like, maybe this is the guy, and so
Yeah.
he lost his spot. But I agree with you for the most part. But hopefully he's in a better spot now and is happy and makes the most out of that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, beyond spring ball of last year, that's really on him for not seeing it, in his
Yeah,
camp for not seeing it. But again, I don't know if he was being told one thing or the other, and fans I'm sure will be like, "Oh, Trevor sucked," in the comments. But I think it's important to mention because I think he's a really good young man who's an awesome teammate. Nobody has a
yeah,
bad word to say about him, and I just didn't think he got a fair shake here.
yeah.
So, of
And Trevor didn't suck, by the way. I mean, you look at some of the plays he
course
made
not.
early in that 23 season.
They don't win the
Um,
TCU game without him. They don't win the CSU game without him, which is
right,
why, like, to write him off as a guy who can't play the position, I think is
right.
I don't get it, Brian.
Yeah.
So I like I say, that's just one thing I wanted to bring up because I felt like, in the future, I hope that situation doesn't pop up again.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks, Matt. We'll catch up again next week, or
Yeah,
yeah, I assume so. We'll see if there's any news next week, but there's always something to talk about. So we'll
for
catch up
sure.
next week when you get back from the beach.
Yeah. Yeah. In the meantime, I'm going to the ocean.
See you, Matt.